Thank you so much for joining me today. We actually have a really awesome podcast today with one of our good friends and colleagues, Manny Blanco, who you'll hear from in just a second. But today we're talking about investing and incorporating your finances into a trust, really a guide for the ages of like 30 to 50. Now, I know we said 30 to 50, but I don't know, maybe Manny will say this actually is applicable to everybody, but most of our viewers are about that age. And so usually we're talking about these topics because I think more needs to be said about why we care about this, but also what are the benefits to doing all this. Today, we're just going to be covering that as a topic. So I want to welcome everyone to our special episode. And you know who I am. I'm Stephanie Garces Donay. I'm an estate planning real estate attorney in Palatine. And I'm joined here by Manny Blanco, a financial advisor with West Point Financial Group. So Manny is a wealth management advisor and has been helping individuals and families build wealth with strategies that adjust basically on the market, right? That is part of your job. So I'm really excited to welcome you. So thanks so much. If you want to just give us a quick update as to who you are and introduce yourself to the viewers. Thanks so
Yeah,
much.
so Manuel Blanco with West Point Financial, which is a Mass Mutual company. Been in the industry now in April is 20 years, but I go a little bit further. I don't want to count my intern years when I was working for another company. But yeah, so I've seen the market with a good 20, 23 years of what it's done.
Well, thanks for joining us today. And so I'm hoping you can share some of your powerful strategies as to what you would do, especially with the market and the times that we're in. There's a lot of changes happening. A lot of people are wondering, is it a right time to invest? How do I protect my money? So we're going to talk a little bit about kind of explaining what a trust is, why it's important to also have wealth management in your back pocket. Just for the viewers that are always looking to see what exactly is a trust, I always call it like a basket. People call it like a car, but it's a legal arrangement where a person who's a trustee holds and manages assets to benefit others, whether it's the beneficiaries or the people you have named. It allows you to transfer your assets while you're living or upon your passing with some specific instructions as to how to manage and distribute them. And so that can actually be very powerful. And there's so much that can be done with trust. We're talking openly what a general trust is. So, Manny, what are your thoughts about trust as a general topic? Do you see this come up? How does someone who's like between the ages of 30 and 50 kind of benefit from incorporating their assets in a trust, at least from your perspective?
So the biggest thing that I see, and especially coming out of COVID, right, and we experienced that for the first time, like on a daily basis, when it comes to probate, we talk about wills and trusts, and as people tend to start building wealth in their 30s into their 50s, they have more things to protect, right? So we always look at trust as one thing is that you want control of how people get the assets that you built and how you pass them on to the next generation. But
Right.
then also too, you want to protect it from creditors, which is one of the biggest reasons too people like to open up trusts.
And for those of you that are wondering what exactly is creditors, we always think about like as attorneys, people that are trying to get money from you, people that are owed money. So that could be credit card companies. It could really be anybody that just says, hey, this person owes me and they've passed now, but I still want to collect. So that's a creditor. Let me ask you this, man. I know you mentioned facilitating assets through a trust, but for those of our viewers that are new to investing, like, what do you tell people about effectively managing and preserving their wealth? And keep in mind that some of our viewers, and actually current and past clients of mine will say, oh, we only make X amount a year. We don't really qualify for these things. And you know how this goes. And so my thought is you're never too early to start. I actually disagree when people say that because I think everybody has a legacy, whether you like it or not. We all have a legacy to protect. And so what do you say to those that are questioning, is this a good fit for me?
So when we look at estate planning and trust planning, really we look at it in two different lenses. One is it for the purposes of taxes, right? So we're talking about people who are worth multi-millions of dollars. So they want to be able to reduce as much money as they give to Uncle Sam. And the other you brought it up is legacy planning, wealth planning. We jokingly say you control the assets from the grave and how it gets distributed to the people that you want, because the joke is that the first generation builds the wealth, the third generation loses it all, right? So what happens to
Yeah,
the
I heard
second
that.
generation?
Yeah.
And so that's how we look at estate planning is like, yeah, as you're building your wealth and you're creating things and as life changes, you want to be protected. You talked about the creditors. We didn't talk about like, but divorce too,
Yeah.
right?
Divorce.
The way we can warehouse these things just to basically plan to what might or might not happen in the future, but we're still in control.
Absolutely. And one of the things, too, by the way, I always tell the viewers is trusts are so important and so different. They have so much value. So a lot of times people will say, I need a simple will. Simple will is what I like to say. Okay, a simple will doesn't afford any privacy. And so I know trusts are huge and that people that are trying to be private, or maybe they're worried about somebody kind of accessing the documents that they have. So if you have a big estate or a small estate, you just don't want people to see who's getting what. A trust is a great way to do that, because if you pass away, the trust has always been and still remains private, which is different than like a will. A will typically becomes public record after you pass because you have to file it. And so that's the difference there. But those are pretty some compelling benefits that we like to talk about. So Manny, how do people optimize their investment strategies with you, or how do people like optimize what they're trying to do? Because I think a lot of people have their money either in a savings account collecting the interest and not really doing anything, or there's people that have it at the local bank, but they don't really know how it's invested. That actually happens quite a bit. So how do those folks optimize their wealth, especially as a young person or as a person who's nearing retirement?
Yeah, so a lot of things that we talk about sometimes goes into like rules of thumbs, right? So someone who's 65 years old, you minus your age, and that's what the portfolio and how aggressive or conservative you should be. So just
Okay.
because you're 25 years old and you got 40 years to invest, so you means you're going to be aggressive. That might not be in you because of the emotion of the roller coaster of the market going up and down, right?
Right.
So we look at the risk, we look at time horizon, and most importantly, what that goal is, right? Because it's easy to talk about, oh my God, these investments are making 100% rate of return and get caught up on that. But when it drops 80%, you're like, what did I just do,
Yeah.
right? So a lot of it too, as the course of time goes, we look at how do we rebalance the portfolios based on how those goals change, right? Because you might be single today, not married with no kids. All of a sudden now you're married with kids, and the goals are different. The risk is different that you want to take.
Yeah, definitely. So, what do you say to individuals that are looking to up the ante in their investments? I think some people, like you said, it starts to changing, whether like kids are getting older, they're getting closer to college, or perhaps they're no longer infants anymore and they're at a point where like they could maybe do like a savings. Or is there anything you help with, like risk tolerance for diversifications or different ideas that you give different couples? So, what do you offer different couples at different stages? Kind of like general recommendations.
Yeah, so general recommendation, like, we'll warehouse money into different buckets. Your short-term buckets, which is immediate needs, right? But someone who, like, let's just say you're in retirement right now, we want to have 1 to 2 years of liquid savings. So regardless of what the stock market does, you're not depleting those assets. Medium between 5 to 10 and long term, which is retirement, college education planning, things that you know that you're not going to touch, and you just want this money to grow and collect interest. More importantly, it's just a compounding effect that a lot of people don't understand. So, again, it's easy to put money in the 401k because they're pulling it out of your paycheck, so you don't see it. But what else? How do we else save money somewhere else where we do see it?
Yeah, that's great advice. I love the fact that you talk about like savings, right? Because I think a lot of people think advisors advise me to use my money and grow it. But I think good advisors like yourself do give a plan as to, okay, you always want to invest, but you also got to have money over here, whether that's for an
Mhm.
emergency, whether that's for money you immediately need in the next 6 months, as opposed to something like long term and things like that. So that's really good advice. So would it be beneficial, do you think, if we shed some light as to how people in the age range strike a balance between like growth and protections? Because some of the people like in their 30s, for example, they're single, no children, and there's people that continue that way for quite some time, and then they don't know how to pivot when it comes time. So, like, what is the best way for people to balance those things? And how does someone know when it's time to come update what they have, whether it's with you or with me, or reassessing? Because I think a lot of people think, oh, I've invested and good. When do people need to reassess? What do you think about that?
I'd say every about 3 years to look at everything. But again, if something changes overnight, you want to be able to have access to someone like yourself or me to say, hey,
Mhm.
my life just changed in this direction. What do I need to do to my portfolio? Obviously, the younger you are when you start investing, the better, because you can save a lot less and let that compounding take into effect, and you end up with more. And a lot of times it's also when it comes to retirement planning, it's like the rule of thumb. Save 15 to 20% of your income. By the time you retire, you're able to retire from 85%. And so it's really hard for especially kids coming out of college with high debt. Is like, hey, I have this big burden of debt. How do I save? And it's again, just into the habit of saving. And as your income increases, you increase what you're putting away for retirement, for your medium term, for the long term goals, short term goals.
No, great. Those are great insights. And I think for those of you watching that are wondering, how do you create a trust to protect those assets? It's actually pretty straightforward. Usually we offer consultations where you can kind of explain how you put a trust together. And the trust is, like I said, it's a legal way to protect that money and leave it for who you want. There's different methods to trust. And actually, there's people that own properties. Like, I don't know if you see this a lot, Manny, in your line of work, but there's people that own different real estate properties too. And they're wondering,
Mhm.
how do I leave that to somebody? Or how do I protect it from a lawsuit or a divorce and things like that. There's a lot of stuff that comes into estate planning that is actually trust focused, but we look at the full estate plan. And I actually work a lot with advisors like you, Annie, especially you, because I feel like you're one call away. But the idea is that I think if you have a good team, as far as like your advisor, your trust, estate planning attorney, you can kind of merge those. It's a good team to have. And I think one cannot work without another. And so I always try to convey to everyone, depending on your age, we'll advise one thing or another, but someone still needs to be the expert in the field. So do you ever have many people that come to you and say, I've been doing this on my own, the DIY advisor, the person that advises himself? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I do have a couple of do-it-yourself advisors and people who say they're doing planning for themselves. And the thing is, I tell them is, but you're not a legal tax consultant. You don't know what the laws are changing. You're not a legal attorney, and also
Yes.
understanding what the rules are changing when it comes to tax planning. Really, because the way we look at it is that your money, the legality, and the taxes are all intertwined with one another.
Yep.
And things are constantly changing. So
Yep.
what might have worked 10, 15, 20 years ago, the laws and the rules are different now, right?
Absolutely. When you said that, I was thinking about the most recent changes. And that's a good point because I'm sure in your world you see it. I know it kind of intermingles, but like taxes is a good thing. I remember sometimes federal versus state taxes, and depending on the state that you're in, or some people have like trusts or estate plans are from other states and then they move here. Or maybe, I don't know if you see that, with people have accounts and estate plans that create another state, where there's certain things here that, we don't necessarily have certain taxes that other states have, or we do have certain taxes that other states don't. And so you're right about that. And I think that's the danger sometimes of people that do it themselves. There is no possible way, because they're not doing this every day as a full-time job, for them to be up in the know about what exactly has been changing. How does it impact them? And how do you elect to invest? So I was just curious if you see those, because I'm sure you have to convert some clients on your own that are Mr. or Miss DIY.
We see people who retire and they leave the state of Illinois because of state taxes, right? And they'll go to like Florida, right?
Right,
Because
right.
they have no state or state tax in Florida, but you still have an estate federal tax that you have to deal with.
Yes,
Right?
yes, yep. And that's the other thing too. It's like depending on where you live and where you reside. And what's interesting about estate planning, or like when you pass, it's like one of the requirements is where you actually resided full time. And so that can be a question mark sometimes. When we've dealt with estates in the past, we've always said, okay, does the person actually live here, or did they have a vacation home here? There's people too that, like you said, they're snowbirds or whatever, but the primary residence is here in Illinois. So what do you do
Right.
with that?
And the scary part too is, bring back COVID, someone residing in Florida and who's a snowbird. And now they're facing probate in two states, right?
Yes,
Instead of
yes, 'cause
Illinois
there's
and state of
there's
Florida.
multiple. Yep.
So what does an estate planning do and a trust? It keeps you from having to go to two different probate courts.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, it's funny that you bring that up, because I think that's part of the estate plan. We do have individuals that come to us with multiple homes, and there's always a plan, right? Because that's where I think as attorneys, we provide the most value, because we're going to say, look, I would do this here, and over there, you could do this over there. Now, a lot of times as attorneys, we even know people or refer the client out to someone who's local counsel, someone that knows the laws in Florida or in Alabama, wherever someone is from. But the point being that there's so many ways to avoid it pretty easily if you just work with a team that does the heavy lifting for you. And I'm sure the accounts are the same. I'm sure, like, do you ever deal with people with different accounts in different state banks and things like that? Are you having to facilitate those? How do you guys usually?
Yeah, so we do, and a lot of times, especially if they have an accountant, so we'll get on the phone with the accountant, right, to
Yes,
understand what their local state laws are and everything, and then so how do we incorporate into the plan that they're trying to put together?
That makes sense. And I think one of the most important things about putting together an estate plan is, again, working with an advisor that understands this and is taking the time to kind of think, okay, what is the assets that you have and where are we going? So I know you mentioned a lot about portfolios and like reviewing portfolios, but do you ever have individuals that are 30-year-olds or millennials that are kind of like, I don't really know if I want to do this. I rather just invest it into Robinhood, stuff like that people just do it on their own. Is that something that people should try to do to supplement with something like that? What are your thoughts on that?
So we do, and a lot of times people are just now open to the fact that diversification is big, right?
Yes.
And we just came from one of the biggest bull market runs, because you think about it, when has the stock market been down 20% in the last 10 years, right? Not since 2008 when the stock market was down 37. So now people are open to have those conversations and say, hey, you know what? I can have my investments, and I tell them, I got clients who say, open up Robin and be a day trader all you want. But this is the money for these goals and these plans. So you have fun with the money that you want to manage, and we'll take care of everything else for you.
Yeah. I love that, Manny. I love that because you're right. I think it's all about diversifying. And just like you said, it's almost like fun money. I know that sounds totally funny to say, but I have actually had people say, oh, that's my fun money. That's what I have fun with. I use that money for whatever. And that makes sense because instead of putting all your savings into, I'm going to do it myself and use something like online, a platform where you don't necessarily have supervision by anybody, I guess you could put a portion of that there too. Are you seeing that more with younger 30, 40-year-olds, or are you seeing that with people in their 50s as well? What is your thought on that?
So mostly the younger kids, right? Who, because if you think about it, the people who are in their 50s, they didn't have a Robinhood. There was no Charles Schwab or apps where you can buy and sell all day long.
Yeah.
So that's kind of fairly new.
Now that's interesting because I know it's new. We've heard a lot about it in the last like couple of years and things like that. But I was trying to remember if this was always in place. I think you demystified that for me because I wasn't totally sure. And by the way, too, when we talk about assets and transferring, people are always like, what exactly is an asset, right? So just so that the viewers who are watching can understand, assets can be anything from like money, it could be homes, it could be cars, it could be anything that you have. And so people always say, I don't know, Manny, if you see this, they'll say, oh, I don't have a lot. And I'm like, well, you have at least a house, right? Or you have a car, you have kids.
Right. Of
You have
course. So when
someone to,
people think of assets, it's always a monetary. What do I have sitting in my bank account with checking and savings? But no, it's more than that, right? I ran into a guy who had some old comic books. He wasn't considering it part of his assets. And I'm like, no, let's get these valued and realize, like, holy cow, I thought something that was a hobby as a kid could potentially turn into millions of dollars for him if he ever decides to get rid of some of these comics that he has.
that's wild. You know, that's interesting. There's people that I've known to have, whether it's like coins or some sort of like furniture that's worth a lot. There are certain assets that do over time appreciate. And I even paintings, actually paintings is a big one where I've seen there's like certain artists that the painting will actually be worth more than when it was bought, which is really, really interesting. But from a legal perspective, though, we always say put your documents in place, your trust documents, your estate plan, because that is still a way to distribute some of this stuff outside of just money. Usually, particularly after like significant events like marriage, divorce, having children, we usually tell people like come update your estate plan, think about what you have in there or put it in place. I can't tell you how many times people have it on their to-do list and don't actually do it. And same with investing. I have a lot of individuals that come and see us and they say, I really want to invest. It's just not a good time, or I don't know what to do. So what do you recommend to people like that, Manny, that just need a kickstart to do it? So what do you usually say to them?
So I always say you always invest today because you don't want market time because we don't know what the market's going to do, right? There's three things: it's up or down or it's flat. But throughout history and over time, it's more than likely it's going to end up higher than what you started with when you were 30 years ago. But I also wanted to talk about, you brought up the word appreciation and with trust. So you have assets that have a potential to appreciate. Yeah, it's good. So even though they're not worth a lot today, to protect them in those trusts, because all of a sudden when they do take off, you mentioned different art. What if this artist all of a sudden becomes next Picasso? And so something that you bought for $10 is now worth 10 million. So
that's amazing. One of the questions that comes up a lot from some of my clients, maybe you see it in yours, is what do you recommend for someone that has lost money? Because I know right now, like you said, things are up and down. Also with the banks, what's been happening in the media, you see the banks kind of folding, which is wild to think about. What do you say to someone that has lost a significant amount of their portfolio in the past year? I mean, I'm assuming these are people you're talking to every day. So does it make sense for them to move their funds to better their investments or write it out? What do you think?
So we look at two things, right? We look at qualified money, which would be like your 401k, IRAs, things that are dictated by the IRS codes.
Right.
Those we probably leave alone. Your non-qualified money, your fund money and stuff, like it might make sense right now to sell at a loss because you're going to harvest some of the taxes, right? So now we reduce your taxable income from the investments that you just created for yourself. So depending on what type of assets we're talking about, that's when we say, okay, yeah, you know what, move this so we can take the benefit of the write-off to let it grow down the road.
Makes sense. No, that makes total sense. And it's interesting from your perspective that because like the consumer thinks I'm losing money, what should I do? But you literally just answered that question as yes, like you said, from a tax perspective, does it make sense to do that? Does it make sense to change the taxable income? Sometimes that's a good thing, depending on where you're at. So how about a business? So business owners tend to have a lot of questions. Can someone's business contribute to a trust and invest pre-tax dollars? And people always ask that. So what are your thoughts on that?
So the quick and short answer is no, right? Because there's tax rules and stuff. But as a business owner, you could grant your shares. You can gift is the correct word. You could gift your shares to the trust to reduce your taxable estate in the future. But something like a 401ks, like retirement plans, they're going to be separated inside of a trust So if your business does become illiquid, well, guess what? Your employees and everybody else, they're protected from those assets. You got to keep them separated.
It's great to hear it from your perspective because, like, for me, I think about it the way you do, like everything is separate, but you're right. I know that people will assign their shares a lot of times, or people that own businesses together for purposes of an estate plan because they want to make sure that, hey, if something happens to me and they sell this business, this money goes somewhere other than in probate, or it's a probate asset all of a sudden because nothing was in place. So that does happen quite a bit.
There's two types of trust, right? The revocable trust and
Yes,
irrevocable
yes.
trust.
For you,
Question is that when people come to you, well, which one should I do, Stephanie? Should I go revocable or irrevocable?
actually, it's funny that you said that because the question to that is so not easy because just when you think someone understands the irrevocable versus revocable, which really the biggest difference is when you can change, which is revocable, you can revoke at any time, you can make changes, and there's like the irrevocable, which is basically essentially when you cannot change. But it's interesting because sometimes objectives change. I've had people that came in and they needed a revocable, and then something happens, and then all of a sudden the irrevocable makes more sense. Do you deal a lot with those, Manny? In your site, do you have people that come to you more with one or the other, or do you see them interchangeably?
One or the other, or actually we're doing both, right? Because one of the trust, it gives you a cost up and a step up in basis. So with the day
Yes.
you pass away, guess what? All that growth just got wiped away because of the step up in basis, where the other one doesn't. So you're gonna pay taxes based on the value of what those funds are inside of that's the trust, right?
Yep,
So
absolutely.
it's always more, are we doing this for a tax estate type of trust, or are we doing this more to keep you protected from creditor divorce and everything else that the trust does?
Yeah, I love that you mentioned that. So for viewers, what Manny's getting into is just like the terms of, and actually the reasons why you don't want to come see an estate planning attorney to explain to you what the differences are. Because actually, some people go out of their way to request a irrevocable trust because, like you said, there's creditor protection, there's this, there's that. But what they don't realize is that there is no quote unquote tax incentives where it comes to, like, if you're trying to do like generation skipping type things where it doesn't necessarily fit in one trust, it definitely fits for the other. But you're right. It's interesting because people will say, I have so many objectives, but I always find that never is a one size fits all. Everyone's situation is so different, which is why you want to consult with Manny or myself, because otherwise you really don't know, you don't really know what's going to happen to your assets if you pass, or like you said, the issue of a divorce or something like that, which tends to happen quite a bit. People forget about the assets. They're like, oh, I'll deal with it later, but it's something that has to be addressed.
They forget about the assets, or they forget to retitle the assets to go into the trust, right?
Oh,
I'm
sure.
sure you run into that a lot.
It's an unfortunate thing to say, but like the reason why a lot of attorneys end up really busy in probate, and actually, quite frankly, even like I would say estate planning, if it's possible, is that people forget to title their assets along the way. So if you have a house and your attorney that did your estate plan helps you fund the trust, everything's titled currently and the way it's supposed to, then you go and sell the home and you buy something else, whether it's in this state or another state, or you acquire more money and all of a sudden you need to have a step up in basis language, maybe in your trust. If it doesn't have it, like you said, you run into either probate issues, tax issues, or you just didn't title things right. So you're going to have to go to probate. And that keeps the attorney in the probate world busy. We have a lot of people that end up having to hire us just for a simple probate because there's something left off. And one of the things I've been seeing a lot, and this might be like a pandemic thing, I don't know if you've seen this, Manny, but we've had some people that have come to see us because State Farm, for example, or insurance companies are saying, hey, this money that was supposed to be given to so and so wasn't titled properly either. And so it's not just the house, it's like insurance policies, sometimes even payouts for employees. There's retirement money that employees are owed that are not titled properly. There's a lot of stuff to look at. We just had a client that came and saw us regarding something like that, where there was something wasn't titled correctly. And again, you just run into the issue of, do you have to go to probate? Do you have to not? And it's such a big question mark because it depends on the situation. And it depends what the money is, how much. So it's always good to put an estate plan together, try to retitle your stuff. Or if you're not sure, just come visit us because at the very least, maybe you're just calling and saying, hey, did I do this right? At least getting a yes and doing some verifying gives you peace of mind, I think is the best way to put it.
So true. Now, the way we look at it in our world, is this a beneficiary titling or is this an ownership titling, in the problems
Yes.
when it comes with either or?
Yeah, absolutely. I always tell people, like, check to make sure you have your beneficiary. Some people forget. Some people
Hmm.
say, I opened this account, I got so excited, I just was going to do the beneficiary thing, but I never got around to it. Also, I don't know if you see this many. Do you see people inherit money sometimes and then they don't really retitle anything in that sense, because we've had a couple people that we've known to inherit something, whether it's from a spouse or someone else, and they're a beneficiary, and then they don't have a beneficiary to their inheritance, essentially.
Yeah, and a lot of times when we're having conversations with our clients and part of the planning process is always asking, hey, do you expect any inheritance?
Yes.
Or when someone gets referred to us and say, I just inherited all this money and now they're concerned about the taxes that's going to come with it. But yeah, we run into it all the time where people don't know how to take inheritance money, or when they receive it, like how do they add it to their estate and how does it affect their current tax bracket, for example.
We've had individuals that inherit money, like you said, it's part of the intake process. We ask if you've inherited or going to. Have you ever seen someone inherit money and then they're sort of questioning whether to put it in a trust, whether to invest it just outright? What do you usually recommend? Because I know inheritance, they have different rules and laws as to how long you can keep that money. So, what are your thoughts on that now that we're talking about it? Because it's a hot topic, at least for us. We've been seeing a lot of people, lucky for them, they're inheriting money, but they don't really know what to do.
Yeah, and then the inheritance, we look at it, is it money that's because someone passed away in a qualified account? So it's a 401k, an
Mhm.
IRA, or something like that. You're correct. They can only keep the money for 10 years before they have to spend it because Uncle Sam still wants a cut of those taxes that were avoided. But you can have money inside of a trust because it's being credited protected and everything else, but you still have to follow the rules that the IRS guidelines set out as to whether you can keep this money. Again, it depends. Is it inheritance from a qualified account or non-qualified account, right? And so a lot of times that's the questions that we have is like, well, I got this money. And so our question is, okay, well, where was it before? What was it invested in before? And that's how we gear the conversation of where it should go.
Yeah, and it's a hard question. We've seen it in different ways. We've seen people inherit from a spouse. We've seen people inherit from a neighbor. I've seen someone inherit from someone that they were caring for. So it really comes in so many flavors. And I think just having the people to help you is vital because, like you said, there are rules. Maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the inheritance world is like constantly changing. I thought that rule existed, but I also seen different things that like they're constantly, and maybe it's just the IRS and tax world, they're just constantly changing things.
Oh yeah, so in our role we have Reg BI and Secured Act 2.0, and so yeah, they have made some changes inside. So that's why, especially for the do-it-yourself people, they're not keeping up. All of a sudden, they go to do
Yep.
their taxes, and all of a sudden, oh, now there's a penalty because they didn't take the money out when they were supposed to.
That's terrible. I always say in the show, knowledge is power, right? The more that you know, the more that you grow. And there's no way, like I said, for the people doing it on their own. And I always tell people, like, please don't do your estate plan by yourself. And please don't just invest by yourself without at least getting in a second opinion at least once, because it at least sheds light as to what are the gaps. I guess depending on the year, anything could happen. And when you pass, what are the laws in place then? And that's the part that gets a little bit dicey, which is why they hire us as professionals to help them with that because we have to keep up with that.
There's times that I have clients that show up with the state tax documents, and I'm like, all right, what did you do this? Oh, well, I just went on a website and created and downloaded the estate planning documents for the state of Illinois. And they haven't done any changes in the last 10 years to it.
It's quite amazing. And respectfully to those folks, I appreciate the initiative. I've actually seen more estate plans that have been like what's in them is intended to be right. Like I know what they're trying to get at. But what makes me so sad is when I see these documents that they're not even properly executed to make them valid. Even if it was like borderline, maybe they could get away with it. It's not even valid. And that's really the number one issue that I see is that it's not valid. It might as well not exist. And that's a pretty scary thought. Manny, I don't think I asked you this, but if somebody wanted to work with you, how do you get paid or how does the fee arrangement work?
So we have two ways that we work with clients. One, if they're looking for advice, then as a fiduciary, we charge a financial advice. And
Okay.
it's an ongoing relationship throughout the year. The other way is if someone just wants something like the other day, I did a rollover for somebody, and that's all they needed to do. So it's like, okay, we'll do very transactional type of
One time thing.
Exactly. But when they start asking about the fees, then we start looking at it. And the fees can go anywhere from 1,000. The highest I've ever charged someone was 7,000 with a
Yeah,
net worth of
the assets, right?
yeah, and just the complexity of the case, right? Because I have some clients who are on their way to be very wealthy, but just because they're worth X amount doesn't mean I'm going to charge them a percentage based on that. It's more how much time and effort does myself and my back office and my team have to put in together to put this plan in place.
That makes total sense. That's great. Well, thanks so much for that. That's great. I just wanted to educate people in case they're wondering. So if anybody has questions for you, where can they contact you?
Cell number or no, actually, yeah, business line. So 312 4521 or email.
I was going to say I have your cell, but I won't give it out.
Yeah, I actually did that once at a friend's podcast, and I was getting the strangest questions and everything. I'm like, no, you know what? Let me filter everything out through my voicemail.
Is there anything that you want to cover that we haven't covered yet that you think is important for your position or for someone that's interested in putting together an estate plan or working with an advisor or together? Is there anything that you think we haven't covered?
I know you talked about, especially with real estate, and so what I
Yes.
see a lot of people is just doing a quick deed, right? Versus
Oh gosh.
getting an LLC.
Oh yes, the quick claim deed is very popular. Everyone loves to just throw the word out there like it's this easy thing.
Yeah, so your thoughts, does it make sense to do that, or does it make sense to do it in an LLC or put it in a trust?
I'm so glad you asked. I love talking about this. Okay, so this is the way I explain it. There are things that are a good way of doing things, and then there's a better way to doing things, right? So a lot of things, I think sometimes, whether it's cultural or what they've heard, people love to throw the word quit claim deed for putting people on the property. A lot of people that call will say, I want to put my sister on it because if something happens to me, it goes to her. So we're going to add her on. Well, there's just so many rules with quit claim deeds. Quit claim deeds are actually very tricky because first, there are lenders in this world that do the loans for the buyer, where there are specific instructions that say you can't move the home to someone else. It's actually a violation of the loan. So that's one thing. But aside from that, even if you start adding people, it gets so complicated. Why? Because the people you're adding is if your intention is to leave them the home, there's better ways to do it, whether it's in an estate plan or a transfer upon death. There's so many better ways where you don't really run into the risk of two estates being involved with one home. We actually have had people that have had up to 4 to 5 people on a deed. And as you can imagine, as soon as somebody passes or somebody gets divorced or something life-changing happens, all of a sudden the home is a big question mark. And so I'm not a huge fan of just adding people to the deeds or throwing people's names on there. It's a poor plan for leaving the home to someone else. That is not what I recommend. A lot of people do it, but that doesn't make it better. It actually makes it like I think it's just like a Band-Aid. Oh, this will make me feel better for now. But there's a lot of unintended consequences with the quit claim deeds. As far as the LLC goes, LLCs do make sense, especially if you're the investor type. We work with a lot of people that are investors. So they don't necessarily live at these homes, they're renting them, and people build like their real estate portfolio. It does make sense to create like a series LLC or to do something where you have this sort of silo between yourself and the home in the event of a lawsuit or things like that. And there's still ways to transfer those interests in the LLCs to your heirs by creating an estate plan. So I think an LLC does make sense in some ways. It just depends on the client and what the objectives are. Do you deal with those a lot on your end as well when you look at estates? I'm sure, because if people have multiple properties or something.
Yeah, we do on the multiple properties. And one of the things that we look at is like in a series of LLCs, right? For, again, protection and being able to do what you want. And especially like when you have multiple investors and families involved in properties and putting their money together. So I think the rules inside of a trust are such rock solid rules that when you go to court, you already laid out the blueprint. We're just following what the blueprint says.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you said they have more rules. Like the way I always explain trust as opposed to a quick claim or doing something that's a little bit more lackadaisical or not as much protection is there is a lot of protection in trust, regardless of what you put in the trust. Everything's customizable, by the way. I've seen that the trust rules where it comes to selling the real estate or hanging on to it or wanting to pay off the real estate, there's so much more protection for the families. I actually see less fighting, less hassle between the banks and the institutions that are expecting payment on a mortgage when it's in a trust as opposed to the decedent's name. And so there's a lot of protection. I'm sure it makes your life easier too.
Yeah. And then one thing too, I see a lot of like my 50-year-old clients who are talking about legacy planning and wealth, but then they don't have the trust. And I try and explain to them, okay, what you're telling me is going to fall into this. No, but I don't need it. But trust me, because again, you want to control it from the grave.
That's exactly the words I use, Manny. That is governing from the grave. And the good thing, it doesn't even have to be from the grave. Technically, it could be in life. For those of you watching, living trusts, for example, could be used even during incapacity. And so I always thought that was super important because there's 2 different methods for trust. Well, it's living trust. Irrevocable is a little bit different. But the point being that there's multiple uses. And you're right, you're governing in another way. That's very, very smart, especially when you work so hard to do that and build up your assets. And speaking of assets, actually, we just had a question that came in on the Facebook Live here. Someone is asking if sneakers are considered assets. And I don't know if you know about the sneaker world. Sneakers are definitely not cheap items. And so if someone has collected sneakers, or for those sneakerheads that are watching, what are your thoughts on that? Do you think that person should think about protecting those assets?
Definitely, and especially, they're authentic Jordans and stuff like that. I jokingly tell one of my friends, if you ever lose your job, you can start going to eBay and selling these shoes that you've collected for the last 20 years, and you got a couple of $100,000 just sitting there. Right, so don't sweat the small stuff, because at the end of the day, if you have to sell one of your gym shoes, you'll get some pretty good money for it. Because again, the assets is not just money; it's something that derives a value. And to someone who doesn't like sneakers, and I use Jordans because those are the more popular ones, but they
Yep.
look at them, they're just Jordans, right? They're not Prada, they're not Manolo shoes, they're not Gucci, they're not Louis Vuitton. But in the sneaker world, they go for more than what Louis Vuittons go for, Gucci
Yes.
shoes, or anything like that.
Yes, absolutely. This actually hits close to home. I know multiple people that are quote unquote sneakerheads. And for the longest time, I was thinking, do people actually pay these prices? But they do. I mean, the day that Jordan is not in style, I don't even know if we'll be around, because they've been in style since they came out. And the value of a Jordan sneaker, and like you said, the people that don't really understand like basketball or sneakers may not even care about it. But there is a community. There's literally like people that are in the sneaker world that do see the value, no different than people that are into paintings or people that are into cars or whatever the case may be. Like you said, assets can come in all different ways and not just money. Now, have you ever worked with someone like that, Manny, that had more like the tangible item as opposed to the cash?
Yes, I had a lady who had a ton of Louis Vuitton, and I forget what the other brand of purses are. They were vintage that she got from her mom that she inherited. So we're
Was it
talking about
Birkin?
these
Was it
collections.
Birkin bags?
No, it wasn't Birkin bags. It'll come to me in a second. But
Okay.
right, so Louis Vuitton's been around forever and a day, and she went and look at what the prices are, and they
Right.
were all like multiple thousands of dollars. Some of them like $100,000 and $200,000 worth, because of it being the brand it is. So those are the things that we want to protect and make sure that she's able to pass them on to her heirs, or if she wants to sell. Again, now we're going to talk about the taxes that come with selling something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. I love that you said that the taxes that come from that, because I think those are the things that the people that do have the tangible items don't think about. And if you sell it during your lifetime, I know that there obviously is something to claim on it. But Manny, what are your thoughts on people that say, no, I actually want to pass these down? Is there any benefit to those tangible items getting passed down as opposed to selling them during their life?
There is, so we talk about life and death. And with that, and we'll bring in the trust, you're able to get a cost up in basis, right? If you
Yep.
put
So the
in,
basis, yep.
so all of a sudden now something that might have been worth 100,000 is worth, from that point on to you, is what you're going to pay taxes, not on the value that it derived when this person bought the purse for $100, and now, you'd have to pay taxes on $199,000 worth of gains. And that's another thing too. We talk about the difference between capital gains, short-term and long-term gains, and what the tax consequence and the different levels of tax that you have to pay on those things. So
Yeah, it's quite amazing, isn't it? That when we see step up in basis, fancy way, I think, for saying you basically benefit your heirs in many ways. They avoid having to pay more taxes on something that if you would have properly planned before. So I love that you mentioned that, because again, like Louis Vuittons, if you've ever gone to a Louis Vuitton store, I mean, I definitely have, and I just a little small purse, little purses that are in at least 8,000 out the gate, and that's now. Who knows what it'll be worth 5, 6 years from now?
my daughter's got a nice little coin purse that she pulled it out on vacation, and this lady saw it and she's like, "Oh my gosh, it's a Louis Vuitton with the little purple flowers." That value to them was 10 times more than what it cost when we first got it for her.
That's amazing. That's cool. I love that. That's really fun. It just goes to show again, just knowledge is power. The more that you know about those things, the better off you're going to be, especially if these are assets that are increasing in value over time, which is it's quite amazing. Manny, thanks so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it. Obviously, you're a wealth of knowledge. So anyone that's interested in Manny's services, please reach out to him. He's a great person to work with, but he also knows a lot of stuff. So it's nice to just talk about things. And I wasn't thinking we talk about sneakers and Louis Vuitton, but hey, I'm sure people are interested to hear it, because
Right.
people may not have the cash, but they definitely like to splurge on the tangible things. There's nothing wrong with that.
Nothing at all. And they don't realize that they're sitting on gold mines sometimes.
Exactly. I love that. And I think some of our viewers will be happy to hear that, because, like I said, I have a lot of clients that have the tangible stuff, but not so much the cash. But like you said, you're actually sitting on it. You just don't know it. So thank you again for joining us. And
Oh, thanks for having me.
yeah, no, it's a pleasure to have you. And it's great to just talk shop, but also just talk about like the basic stuff, because again, a lot of our viewers are just here to watch, and we use our platform to kind of educate. And I think hopefully everybody learned something today. Thank you so much to our audience for tuning in. If you want to contact us, you have our information on the screen below. And keep in mind, it is essential to consult with an experienced financial advisor and estate planner, specifically if you live in Illinois, just to make sure that everything is correct, everything from your assets to where you want your things to go upon your passing, or God forbid, you become incapacitated. We have a plan for that. So I think preparing is better than not for any unexpected events. So make sure you guys contact us. Don't leave it up to chance.
Well, and we say not having a plan is a different plan. It might not be the right plan, but it's still a plan.
That's such a nice way to say it. I usually call it like jumping out of a plane without a parachute, but that's just me. Awesome. Well, thanks again for sharing the strategies.
No, thank you.
Yeah, definitely. And if anyone has any questions, feel free to chat us after the show. And thanks for watching. I hope you guys have a good day, and we'll talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.
Take care.